Alright, Shalom, welcome back. Okay, today we're going to be focusing on this lesson. This is going to be grammar rules. All of this, since the series of videos that I'm going to be working on here, is specifically going to focus only on grammar. Okay, the rules of grammar, and it's only going to be the stuff that is absolutely the heart and soul of what Biblical Hebrew is. Okay, and so we're going to understand this based upon a theory. Okay. And the theory is I want to help you to know Hebrew grammar before you even look at Hebrew words. So that from a theory standpoint, you can understand the logic of how Hebrew grammar works. Okay? So this segment, this is only going to be focusing upon nouns. This is how nouns are used. This is going to be how nouns function. This is going to be how nouns operate in a Hebrew sentence. Okay, so based upon these rules, okay, we're going to have absolutes. Okay, these are the absolutes of everything we need to know in relationship to Hebrew grammar. Okay, and all of these things that you're going to be learning here is going to be the complete foundation of how Biblical Hebrew works, how it functions, how it operates, and how it is that you're going to visually see this operate over and over again. Since we're going to be focusing on nouns, we're going to talk about everything you could fathom about nouns. Okay? So we have to understand these rules, and if we understand these rules, when we actually start to work with them, we can immediately understand by what we've learned here how to operate in relationship to knowing how to function with Hebrew. Okay, so what is rule number one? Rule number one is going to be nouns are always based upon two things. Okay, so nouns are always based upon two things. What are these two things? Okay? Nouns are always based upon these two things. So now we're going to do, the first is going to be masculine. And the second is feminine. So we know nouns are always based upon two things. You have a masculine form of a noun and you have a feminine form. Okay? How are we going to identify feminine nouns is going to be based upon a simple rule. That if we find a hey at the end it will identify that the noun is feminine. Right? So that's a very simple rule here. These are absolutes that we're going to have, we're going to know, we're going to understand. And these absolutes are going to teach us the foundations of all the things we need to know in relationship to nouns. Before we even get into an actual noun itself. I don't even have to look at a noun. I don't even know how the noun works. I don't even have to know right now how the noun, looks, not works, but how the noun looks. All I know, okay, is that there are nouns that exist in Hebrew. And I have to know my alphabet, okay, because what I'm telling you is feminine nouns are based upon finding a hey at the end, which will identify that this is a noun that is feminine, okay? There also is an exception. To nouns. Alright? So we have to understand this as well. we have to understand rule number one, nouns are always based upon two things. Nouns are either masculine or feminine. If they're masculine, then we're going to understand that masculine means that it doesn't have anything to do with the feminine rule. Okay? So that's a very simple thing to understand. Okay? So we find that a feminine, if a hey is at the end of it, it will identify the noun as feminine. Okay? Or, as we're going to continue on to the next part, if there is a tav. Alright? So my first rule of understanding nouns is that nouns are based upon two things, a masculine and a feminine base. Based upon the fact of what is making it masculine is going to be the fact that this area of what is called feminine does not exist. So how do I identify if it's a feminine noun? I will see that there's a hey at the end, or I will see that there's a tav at the end. This is going to identify to me immediately that this is a feminine noun. Okay? So we now need to understand that there is an exception to this rule. Okay? The exception to nouns is going to be based upon the fact that nouns, which are based upon country and dual appendages or body parts, although they may look masculine, they are always feminine. Okay? So if I know that any country, which is the exception to the rule, which could look masculine, or dual appendages or body parts, such as when we think of anything that has dual, you can think of lungs, you can think of eyes, you can think of ears, you can think of hands, okay? These dual appendages or body parts which are dual, anything that has a double, okay, is going to be the exception to the rule with regard to identifying feminines, okay? Now, the third thing which we're going to put here, so actually we can change this 2 here, we'll put 3, because I forgot we do need to add this part here, okay? So nouns which are based upon 3 things, there's this one other rule, and this other one is called common, which means this noun can be either masculine or feminine, okay? And these are completely rare, okay? So the common nouns are rare, and we have to know that these can be masculine or feminine in nature, okay? So that's very important to understand, okay? So this is going to be rule number 1 here, okay? Now when we go to rule number 2, we're going to identify how masculine and how feminine nouns look in relationship to its visuality, okay? We're talking about the visual appearance, all right? Remember, the simplicity of learning these rules is just to have a strong knowledge of the grammatics of how Hebrew functions. Once I understand these things and I memorize these things really well, I immediately can go into a Hebrew grammar book and I can start working with it without having to start with all of these weird looking letters, because I already have a knowledge base that's telling me that there are certain letters that I should already memorize that's going to identify when I'm looking at nouns what a noun is and how a noun functions. We're going to talk about all the different functionalities that nouns can do, how they can be attached, what they can be attached to, but here we're just going to talk about the rule number 1. So the rule number 1 we have is nouns are always based upon 3 things. They're either masculine, feminine, or common, okay? If they are masculine, the rule is going to be that they will not be according to number 2 and number 3, okay? Number 2 is, if they have a hey or a tav at the end, then we know that this is automatically going to define that this is feminine. And we know that if the exception to the rule, such as countries and dual appendages and body parts, since we know that these things will look masculine, I will know that these are actually feminine, okay? And so here we have common. These are the nouns that can be used in relationship to both a masculine or a feminine. And this is going to identify to me the simple rules of nouns. Now, the thing we're going to say here with regard to masculine is there are also other exceptions. So we're going to put an exception down here. Most nouns are masculine, right? If they do not have a hey and the tav at the end, okay? However, we're going to learn this. There's an exception to how they're going to look based upon rule number 2. So don't really put exception here, but we're going to talk about that actually when we get to rule number 2, okay? So to make it more simplified, we have rule number 1, what these are, that nouns have 3 things to be understood as: masculine, feminine, and common. All right? Now that we have that simple understanding of how nouns are in relationship to this, now we have to get to the next point, which is to identify the next rule with regard to nouns. So here's going to be the next rule, okay? So this is going to be rule number 2. Rule number 2, this is going to be teaching us how to identify plural nouns. Okay? So number 2, how to identify plural nouns, right? We know that there's masculine. We know that there's feminine. Okay? So rule number 2 is going to teach us, when we get to this point, as we're working on right here, that nouns also have a plural form. Right? So rule number 2 is nouns also have a plural form. And now we're going to talk about how to identify the plural forms. So for the masculine and for the feminine, we're going to notice there's a distinction between the two of them. With the masculine, we're going to have a yud and a mem sofit. And you're going to see a harik underneath the letter before the yud. Okay? But this is not as important, the hirik. What's more important is identify the yud and the mem sofit. If I see the yud and mem sofit, I know I have a masculine plural form. The feminine form is going to be the vav and the tav. So we're going to see the ot sound at the end of the feminine form. This is going to tell me that this word is feminine. This is going to tell me that this word is masculine. Okay? But however, there also, once again, is exceptions. So the exception tells me that some nouns look feminine / masculine in the plural form, but are not actually feminine or masculine. Okay? And so, for example, we learned that the appendages, right? Human appendages, like anything that has a dual body part, lungs, kidneys, hands, we know that when we put them in a plural form, it's going to have the masculine look. However, the masculine is not the reality of it. It's a feminine noun, okay? And so therefore, I'm going to have to know that if I have this issue here, which is identifying the fact that this is a dual appendage, okay? Or, this is another exception, that there might be a noun that is masculine in its normal form, but it takes on a feminine ending in its plural form, okay? And this is something we have to understand, that these are irregular nouns, okay? So we're going to call these irregular, okay? Irregular nouns because they don't function like the norm, okay? So these are irregular nouns that don't work according to the simple law of how nouns normally function. So we have to understand that nouns, they have a plural form in rule number 2. How to identify plural nouns is going to be based upon the fact that masculines are going to have yud and mem sofit. Feminines are going to have vav and tav. And this is going to identify that this is a feminine plural. The exception to the rule is that some nouns look feminine but are masculine, and the plural form, which are actually masculine, which can look also feminine, okay? And we're going to call these the irregulars, okay? They're not the commonality of what nouns look like. So we have to understand that based upon this, I already have a strong understanding of just the simplicity of how Hebrew is going to function. So if I was to take, for example, a box and put lines, for example, not a box, but put lines here, and I was to put letters in this, okay? If this was an X, an X, an X, which represents a Hebrew word. The minute I add yud and mem to it, I know that this is the masculine plural form. The minute I add the vav and tav to this, I know immediately that this is the feminine plural form. If I know the rule that some nouns, if I put them back in the singular form and they look masculine, I have to ask the question, is this a dual appendage or is this an irregular noun? If it's a dual appendage, then I know immediately it's going to look masculine in the single form, and therefore it looks masculine and also in the plural form, but yet I know it's actually feminine. If it's an irregular noun, I'm going to see that if it looks feminine in the plural form, but I can see the noun and I can tell that the noun actually is not feminine itself, then I know that it's an actual masculine noun. Okay? That's how simple this rule is going to be for you. You have to understand that. Because you're not going to have a strange masculine, okay, that looks feminine, and you can't find the actual last letter of the masculine noun. You have to understand that. So, a masculine noun will have no hay in it and no tav at the end. Okay? Because we already know that the rule is if it has hay or tav at the end, then I know immediately that this is a feminine noun. Okay? So, if I see that there is no hay or tav at the end, then I have to sit there and say, okay, this is the actual masculine noun. Now, how can I see if there's a hay or tav at the end? Well, you have to also know there's another rule, okay? And that rule is going to be what we go to when we get to number 3. This is going to be how to identify the changes of nouns from singular to plural when it comes to feminine. Okay? So here we go. Now we get rule number 3. Rule number 3 is all feminine nouns which have a hey at the end must, okay, become ot, as well as all nouns which have a tav. Alright? So if I took, for example, and put an X, we don't know Hebrew letters yet, we just know these ones that we're learning here, okay? If I see a hey, or if I see a tav, I know immediately that this is a feminine noun, right? So, what is the rule? If a feminine noun, which has a hey at the end, must become ot, as well as nouns that have a tav, when in the plural form. Okay? So I know that if I have a tav or a hey at the end, I'm going to have to immediately eliminate the hey and the tav, and I'm going to have to replace it with an ot at the end. And therefore, the hey and the tav will be erased and ot will be put in its position. Okay? Now, how do I know, okay, how do I know if the noun I'm looking at is an actual irregular noun, which means it's an actual masculine noun, but it looks feminine? And the answer is going to be simple. If I can take the ot out of the equation and I try to put a hey, or I try to put a tav at the end of the noun, and I cannot find it in the dictionary, okay, because all the Hebrew words that are in the Hebrew dictionaries are going to carry the singular forms, okay, I know, for example, it's not a feminine noun. And this is going to be something that you're just going to have to, learn to memorize. Irregular nouns are not common, but they do exist. And because they do exist, we still have to learn to memorize them quickly so that we can see whether or not this is the irregular form. And this will only follow with regard to masculine when we're looking at the feminine issues here. I've already taught you what would happen to the issue of if the noun is feminine but looks masculine, because it's very simple. You're going to see that with dual appendages, and that's it. Okay? Dual appendages, dual body parts is going to be the only thing you're going to have that's going to do this, where you're going to have to make a feminine noun look masculine. So when we're talking about a noun that looks feminine, all I have to do is simply this. Take away the ot, put a hey or put a tav at the end, and try to look at my word in the dictionary. If I cannot find it with a hey or tav at the end, I can guarantee you that this last letter is the last letter in the word. You follow that? That's how simple this is. So if I can find that the hey or the tav does not work, I cannot find it in my dictionary, this word does not exist, okay, then I can identify that the last letter that was placed before ot is the actual last letter. And therefore, the noun is actually based upon whatever letters that are existing before ot. Okay? Now we have to understand rule number 4. Rule number 4 is going to teach us about how to identify a definite noun. Okay? So rule number 4. Definite nouns come in 3 forms. Alright? Definite nouns come in 3 forms. What are the forms? Okay? Number 1, we have a proper noun, which means the noun itself is the name of a person, place, or thing. Therefore, it is definite by nature. Then we have the next noun, which is always going to be the hey article is added to the first letter of the noun. Alright? So let's get an identification of this, okay? We had that little thing we did. We took X, 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 right? And we're going to pretend X, X, X is my noun. So now that we look at X, X, X is my noun, all I have to do is say, if I have a hey, and I put that vowel called a patach or a kamatz, okay? Patach looks like this. A kamatz looks like a T, alright? If I have this or this in front of a noun, I definitely know that it's definite. Because the hey article means the word the. It's the definite article, alright? So the hey article, or you could say the hey definite article, is added to the first letter of the, okay? So now that I know that the hey can be added to the first letter of the noun to make it definite, I need to know one more thing. What is another way I can make a noun definite in Hebrew? Number 3. How can I make a noun definite in Hebrew is going to be having a possessive pronoun ending. So if I have a possessive pronoun ending, that means that the pronouns which are attached to the end are going to make my noun definite. Alright? I'm not going to go and give you the possessive pronoun endings. You can go to my video, which I go in depth and show you the possessive pronoun endings. But this is the rule, okay? So if you know the rule, then you know you have a definite noun based upon these 3 rules, okay? So rule number 4, definite nouns come in 3 forms. What are these 3 forms definite nouns come in? Number 1, a proper noun, which means the noun itself is definite. The noun itself defines a person, place, or thing. Number 2, the noun has a hey article, which is the definite article, which means the word the, and it's added to the first letter of the noun. So it's like English. I have a proper noun, or I have a noun that has the word the before the noun. The door. That's the same thing we're going to use with Hebrew. The only difference is the hey article is attached, okay? So let's get this down here. Hey is always attached to the first letter. Alright? So you always got to remember that. That's the rule. It's always attached. It's never detached, okay? It is always attached, okay? And rule number 4 carries the last one, which is 3. it has a possessive pronoun ending, which means we're looking at a noun. Remember my X, 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 right? This is my little pretend noun. That means at the end, I'm going to have letters that are going to represent pronouns. Okay? And I'm saying letters, I'm saying there are some letters that are going to be found that if this exact letter is used, it represents a pronoun. Okay? And this is very important to know. Very, very important to know. Alright? Very important to know. So that's something to understand in that case. Okay? Now we're going to go to rule number 4. Okay? This way we can really get out everything that you could possibly fathom. Okay? So, rule number 5. Alright? Nouns can be instead of say can be, we're going to say will be. Nouns will be always after a prepositional phrase. Alright, what's a prepositional phrase? This is for you guys who've forgotten prepositional phrases, who don't remember what a prepositional phrase is. All a prepositional phrase is you have a preposition, right, which is going to be X, which is going to be some kind of word. We're going to do X, X, X. We're going to say that's the preposition. And after the preposition, you have a noun. Now, based upon the noun is going to be based upon the qualifications of what kind of noun does it have to be. Is it going to be an indefinite noun? Or is it going to be a definite noun? Okay? Now, in rule number 6, we're going to cover indefinite and definite in full. But here, we're going to understand a part of that in rule number 5. And that's only because rule number 5, we're talking about prepositional phrases. Okay? So in a prepositional phrase, you're basically taking a preposition. A preposition is like the word to, for, against, with. Okay? And afterwards, we have a noun. Okay? To the store, for the man. Okay? That's your preposition. So the question we have to ask is the 3 things, all right? Or actually, we're going to say it's the 4 things. The 4 things are going to be, does it follow the 3 requirements, all right? Does it follow the 3 requirements for needing a noun that's definite? Or is the noun going to be indefinite? Now, I'm giving you a head step on this, even though we're not going to cover this until rule number 6. The rule is, in rule number 6, that all nouns in themselves are indefinite, unless they are required by the nature of the noun for it to be a proper noun. Okay? Countries are obviously going to be proper nouns. Names of people are obviously going to be proper nouns. Okay? So that means the rest of the nouns that we have in Hebrew are called indefinite. So the indefinite article that we use in English doesn't exist in Hebrew. So nouns in themselves are just indefinite by nature. Okay? So if I need a noun that's indefinite, then I just need to write the noun without any of the things that identify to be definite, right? So I'm not going to use the name of a person. I'm not going to have a hey attached to the noun to make it definite. I'm not going to have a pronoun, possessive pronoun ending to make it definite. I'm just going to write the noun. So the noun for this example could be the noun child. Okay? In English, I'm using the word child. In Hebrew, it would be the word yeled, okay? If I wanted to use it as a definite, then I'd have to name what the child name is. So I'd have to say Moshe. So he went to Moshe, all right? If I was to say it as a definite in the sense of not referring to Moshe, but referring to a man, I would have to say to the man. I'd have to add the definite article hey to make it the. If I'm going to say my, for example, if it's my horse, I'd say susi, el susi, to my horse. That makes it definite. These are the three requirements that make it definite, and those three requirements are what we just learned in rule number 4. So everything we have to learn about with regard to indefinite is going to be the fact that all nouns in themselves are indefinite unless the requirement is it must be definite because it's a proper noun. Alright? Which now we have to go to this. Oh, let me finish this part. So remember, prepositions are always going to be before the noun. You're never going to have a noun and then a preposition, and that this is the prepositional phrase. Prepositional phrase is always broken up preposition and then the object of the preposition. So it's just like English, very similar in the nature of English. You have the preposition and then the object of the preposition. So this is called the object of the preposition. And this is called the preposition. When you combine these two together, you get what's called a prepositional phrase. Okay? So when I combine the preposition and the noun, I get what's called a prepositional phrase. And that is what we have to understand, is that the prepositional phrase is when a preposition and the object of the preposition are used together. Otherwise, I would only have just a preposition, okay? But notice